Hi, I'm Carrie, a stroke survivor and a member of Bind.
And I'm Kezia, a stroke survivor and member of Bind as well. And today we're welcoming Dr. Robert Baric, who is a chiropractor that's dedicated to holistic health and wellness. He is the founder of MyConcussionDr, where he specializes in neurotherapy and whole body treatment for concussion management. So, welcome, Dr. Robert. Dr. Robert Baric.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Welcome to Bindwaves, the official podcast of the Brain Injury Network of Dallas. I'm Brian White, Bind's Executive Director. On each episode, we'll be providing insight into the brain injury community. We'll be talking to members and professionals regarding their stories and the important role of Bind's Clubhouse. We work as a team to inspire hope, community, and a sense of purpose to survivors, caregivers, and the public. Thank you for tuning into Bindwaves. Let's get on with the show.
Well, thank you so much for joining us virtually. As mentioned earlier, it has been quite an experience for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know it's the first time we all meet, but also for our listeners.
So 29 years ago, started a chiropractic practice, and approximately 9 years ago, after coincidentally my mother had a stroke, we started Neurofeedback. So I'm board certified in Neurofeedback, largest clinic in North and South Carolina, and specialized in traumatic brain injury, on the board of the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina.
Awesome. That's great to hear. We're excited that you are totally from a different state. This is all very exciting.
It is very cool. So yeah, BIA North Carolina. We're part of BIA as well, as probably most of us all. But so we're gonna ask some basic questions to get started. Just again, for the general public, we're hoping to make everyone more aware of all these different things. So how would someone know that they had a concussion and should go see a doctor?
Concussion and traumatic brain injury. There's working documents for concussion and brain injury. The current ones are out of Berlin and Amsterdam. Those are kind of where all the smart people in the world get together, and it is a very squishy diagnosis. One of them is that on an image they see a bleed in the brain. So basically, it's as much of a symptomatic diagnosis as is it actually an imaging diagnosis. One of the best ways to actually test concussions, if you had one or a traumatic brain injury, is two things: with a good eye examination or also a QEEG. That is what we do with neurofeedback, that we're able to pre-scan like a athlete, and then post-scan, or people do come in after some type of an injury that has not had a pre-scan, and there are many good indicators from the scan that can tell us if that was a potential cause.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how all of this has started because of your mother experienced something, stroke, and you have also mentioned a lot of traumatic brain injury and the concussions. From what you have experienced, what do you think are the most important steps to take, and possibly immediately after getting these feelings of either a concussion or a TBI?
So that is the $1 million question, and basically why I get up in the morning, because a little bit of physiology. Your brain weighs 1% of your body, consumes 25% of your calories. And obviously we all know our brain controls everything. So it's super important to get the brain up and running as quickly as possible. And when a brain has some type of a head bump, that could be in a bathroom, or that could be in a sporting event, or that could be, we want to maintain the energy systems in the brain. And the brain is very unique. It can run on glucose, which probably all of ours are running on right now, or it can run on ketones. And ketones do not get turned off. The brain does not turn them off or turn them down more appropriately when it has a TBI. So as soon as you suspect a TBI, we want to get the brain into ketosis as quick as possible. Why? Because your brain is just a huge compilation of pumps. And is it the sodium potassium pumps? Is it the glymphatic pumps? And I almost use the example of New Orleans, right? New Orleans is a city underwater. So if the pumps stop, it backs up. If the brain cannot get enough energy during this supercritical time, the glymphatics do not drain, the membranes do not drain, and basically all of that sludge that the brain's constantly producing backs up. And then as a result, it basically turns to glue, and now we're in a mess. So energy restoration is by far the number one thing you want to try to restore. And you have to use alternate sources. We use a thing called exogenous ketones. Basically, it puts you immediately into ketosis. So we're finalizing developing a product where it's the acute. If you have a concussion, it's like an 8 to 10 day program where you're taking a combination of ketones and other various anti-inflammatory agents, natural ones that get into the blood-brain barrier. So the brain can kind of limp along while that bruise is going on, and it doesn't basically get clogged up with all the toxins of the cells trying to recover online.
Okay, I do love that analogy of New Orleans, but I'm going to back up just a little bit
Sure.
because I'm going to make it more generic just for the listeners on concussion. Like you talked about, a bump on your head, maybe in a sporting event, maybe in the bathtub. So at what point do you have that bump that you make your loved one or whoever it is go to the hospital and make sure it is or is not a concussion, and that our ketones are working, or that we need to do something? Because my mom falls a little bit too much, and I can't always get her to go to the doctor or to
Okay.
the hospital to check. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
To make sure people know what they should be doing right away.
Okay, so I want to take just a minute and talk about traumatic injury, TBI, traumatic brain injury, or concussion. Oftentimes people think of one. It's not. It's when you fall on your head when you're 2 years old, and then when you fall when you're 16, and then when you fall off the bike, or when you bump your head in the shower. So what we've learned is it's the cumulative effect of all these mild, moderate head bumps. They add together. You ask a simple question. You can't run off to the emergency room every time and get a CAT scan. You are correct. So, the easy and quick one when you absolutely have to is if you have pupils that do not follow each other. So if you shine a light in one eye and one pupil gets small, but the other stays big, immediately to the ER, 100% rapid. But that, again, is extremely rare. So you raise a simple question of, you're now into this huge gray area of, well, do you have one or do you not? And it's a little bit of how do you err on the side of safety? But as you say, if your mom bumps her head once a week, you can't run to the emergency room every time. The eyes, specifically eye movements, could give you a lot of information as far as, is the brain having trouble processing that? But you can also ask them situational. What did you have for lunch? What day is it? Who's president? What's where were you born? They're going to remember the old stuff. It's what did they do 30 minutes ago? Where are they at? Where's their situational awareness? So there's a lot of tests that you can just give. It's called SCAT tests, where you're just asking questions, and these are time sensitive questions. Where you ate lunch today? Right? That kind of situational things that, oh yeah, I had breakfast. What did you eat for breakfast? I had blah, blah, blah. And so you can do like an inventory. You can do a simple exam. But again, you're in this huge gray area that the world is in. You can't run off to the emergency room and get a CAT scan every time you have a head bump. Otherwise, your mom just got to check into the hospital.
Yeah, and I think all of us as brain injury survivors or stroke survivors that have had this experience, we're like, oh yeah, the doctors ask me that all the time. But you know what? We got this comment in one of our conversations in another episode that we are really good doctors for ourselves, and we need to think about that. Like, we should ask those questions when we have this experience, right? So I think that was really good to know. But what are some common misconceptions of like having a concussion and like how we recover?
So everybody, I mean, I think the human default is to say, "Oh, I'm fine. It was just a head bump," and the reality is it wasn't, or it oftentimes is not. So that is where that objective second person is going to be real critical, because they're going to say, no, your balance isn't as good, or you're confused, or they're just not situational aware. And in like the current working diagram and the current working documents, you need to look at the eyes as far as tracking and as far as a thing called saccades. Saccades are, imagine you're looking out your car and you're not you're a passenger, and you see something, and then your eyes jump ahead and you see something again, and then you see. So those are called saccades. Saccades are convergence. Are your eyes tracking the pen? Is your balance where it needs to be? What's going on with your cervical spine? This oftentimes is a huge area. This is recommended that it must be checked with everybody who has a potential TBI, because your neck gives your brain all kinds of proprioceptive information. So we really are getting a lot of clarity as far as an assessment. It's still not 100%, but there's somebody that has a head bump. We want to just check all of them, not just rest. Rest is important, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, that's really important to understand. And I think that earlier you were mentioning a lot of like the needs of like nutrition and I can't say these words.
Metabolic needs.
Yes. Carrie said it.
That's why we work together.
So how is that so important for like a post injury and also for recovery after a concussion? I think you were mentioning it earlier, but why is it so important?
Okay, so the critical time, anytime you have a head bump, is really the first, as quick as possible, but for the first 10 days. Because the brain is producing the brain is ravenous. It's consuming 25% of your calories through the glucose system. So, and what are those calories being used for? Well, they're not running up and down stairs. They're maintaining energy potentials. They're basically pumping. They're trying to keep certain electrons on one side of the cell compared to the other. They're detoxifying. So without that the brain is constantly fighting or constantly keeping these energy potentials to allow the brain to function correctly. When a brain has a TBI, many of those systems do not fail totally, but they greatly reduce. And they reduce so much that they no longer can get rid of the junk that the glial cells are producing. We've all heard of our lymphatic system, but in the brain, we have glial cells with a G, and there's a glymphatic system. And the brain's just not able to detoxify. So that energy is super duper critical. And as I had said, the glucose system oftentimes either greatly reduces or fails post-traumatic brain injury, post-head bump. And that is why that introduction of ketones is so critical. Think of it as you're in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. You have a backup generator. Well, all those people in Houston that didn't have a backup generator for 4 days weren't having good days. But everybody who did have a backup generator, it was a whole lot better. They weren't as good as they were without it, but I think they were very happy they had it for those days when the power was out.
Exactly. So we're talking a lot about the metabolic needs and that kind of stuff, but how does nutrition play into all this? I mean, it seems like nutrition would to help you boost that energy.
Correct. So you have natural anti-inflammatories that you can take. And is that curcumin, or is that vitamin D, or fish oil, or N-acetylcysteine, or acetylcholine? There are many things that you can kind of help the brain in its metabolic challenge. And it's super important that when you take something here, it needs to go down, get absorbed, and then get through the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is a screen door here. It is super duper difficult to get through. And that, to give you an example, heaven forbid somebody has brain cancer, a cancer in their head, they can't give them chemo agents. Why? Because the chemo agents can't get through the thing called the blood-brain barrier. So there are many things naturally, from vitamin D and fish oil, as I'd said. There's many nutrients that can be very neuroprotective when there is some type of a head bump or a stroke, either one. I mean, both are the same.
Interesting. I think this is probably the first conversation that we have it like this. I'm like, interesting. This is just like, my mind is like in awe of all the information that you're giving us. This is really good. I think that this is something that you offer in your practice.
So we've kind of backed into this because I'm board certified in neurofeedback, and I see people that are coming in with anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, and this is not the only cause. But when I start doing a history, you have anxiety. It's been here for 3 years. Okay. And I say, so any traumas? No, I haven't had any traumas. Perfect. Then I say, okay, tell me about any head bumps or auto accidents or stuff like that 5 to 7 years prior. Oh yeah, I had one. Oh, how were you before that? You know what? I didn't have the anxiety. So many of these simple traumas of life, is that an auto accident? Is that a fall in the shower? Is that a sporting event? I was working with an NFL player yesterday, anxiety beyond a belief. So we have very good results with neurofeedback in fixing this, but it's so much easier to deal with a little problem than a big problem, right? And I'm an analogy person. If you have, heaven forbid, we all have fire extinguishers in our house, but something's left in the oven too long, oh my gosh, spray it out. Yeah, I got a little mess. But if I leave it in the oven and I leave, I might come back and the flames might be coming through the roof. Most people their condition has been able to smolder so long that now I have a massive issue. And again, my kind of secret sauce in life is I keep asking why. Aha. So if we can put out the fire in the stove, we don't burn the whole house down. So I think, what was your question again? Because I want to make sure to answer that is.
Yeah, no, I actually was just wondering, is this something that you like offer in your practice? But now that you're talking more about it, I think it's also important for our listeners to understand neurofeedback therapy and like how is that involved also in the recovery and the treatment?
Okay. So let me give you 30-second history. Neurofeedback started in 1965 with NASA. In the Gemini space program, the astronauts are having seizures around rocket fuel. So they bring in Dr. Barry Sternman. He does a thing called a QEEG. He puts a cap on their head, goop in their hair. We gather 20,000 data points. Basically, that tells me if they're a good candidate or not. Everything is based on data. Every astronaut gets neurofeedback to date. Basically, I'm a mechanic of your brain. So think of, you have in your car, you have a check engine light. Well, you don't know what's on, but something's going on. So we're able to basically put a cap on the head, and we're able to gather 10,000 data points, eyes closed, 10,000 data points, eyes open. Tells me if you're a good candidate or not, and then basically tells me what do we need to improve, what do we need to fix. So what does that mean? That there's basically the big psychological term is operant conditioning or behaviorism, but in the real world it's called puppy training. When your brain does what we want, we reward it. When your brain doesn't, we take the reward away. So I'm not shocking the brain. I'm not doing anything. I'm just the biggest cheerleader. Good job, good job, good job, or I ignore it. They're just in watching television. So the three things we see, the majority are anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, and insomnia, sleep issues. And those are ways that we're able to, using the principle of neuroplasticity, able to kind of I don't want to say reprogram, but optimize the brain so the brain is able to stay on task, or the beta waves are higher on the left side of your head, which is associated with low anxiety or depression or that kind of stuff. But that's so neurofeedback. Not been around since 1965. It's been around forever. The technology has gotten very consistent. And then in my world, I tell people you have 4 brains in your body. You have a right brain, a left brain, you have a thyroid brain, and a gut brain. And so many people come in that we have to help them with their gut as much as this brain, because the happy hormones come out of the gut. In a TBI, like that, we want to reduce the energy drain on the brain. What does that mean? We want to put them in a dark room. We want them to get off screens. We want them to be able to lower the load on the brain. If you're watching screens, if you're on a phone, you're on a TV, your brain is thinking. Well, if we can just kind of have it glide for a bit, it will use less energy, and then the brain will be able to allocate more energy to healing.
I love that. But real quick, before I ask my next question, I
Sure.
have to take a quick little pause
Yep.
and just remind our listeners to go ahead and click the buttons that you're whatever you're watching or listening. Go ahead and click the like, share, or whatever it may be, and just keep on listening. And then everything that you're saying makes perfect sense. But since you talked about the 4 different brains, one of my questions that I was thinking about is so, and we keep saying concussion because I guess that's kind of what we thought was going to be more about concussion. But yes, we're very familiar with TBI. I mean, we're stroke survivors, so we're very familiar with TBI, and a lot of people don't think they're the same thing because they're like, oh no, I just had a mild concussion. I didn't have a TBI. But whether it be a mild concussion or a very traumatic brain injury, how does how does that impact the whole body? It's not just the brain that's affected. I mean, I kind of know that, and Kezia kind of knows that, but we want our listeners to understand that more. That it's not just, and I'm not talking physical problems. I'm talking, because the brain controls everything that's going on. I don't remember what brain you said this was, or the gut brain, but I mean the brain controls everything, right?
Okay. So there's two conversations. We'll kind of summarize them quick. Your brain, as I said, consumes 25% of your calories. Your energy comes out of your thyroid. So your thyroid creates the rate of glucose burn, and oftentimes we will pick up functional hypothyroid from the scan. So the scan will tell us there's a problem. Then we'll do further blood work to see what's going on with the thyroid. And sadly, many times the thyroid blood work done by primary care is not adequate enough to get a true assessment. So you need to do a much more thorough thyroid workup. In addition, in the gut is primarily IgG or food sensitivities or delayed reactions or leaky gut, stuff like that. So that's kind of the 4 brains. But in the research, the brain affects the GI system. So it'll cause you to potentially have leaky gut if you have a traumatic brain injury. Visual, you have dizziness. I have convergence. I have reading fatigue. I have vertigo, any of those things. Cardiac, when you have a TBI, it actually affects how your heart functions. So it affects cardiac output and creating more inflammation and catecholamines. Musculoskeletal, the higher risk of musculoskeletal injuries, like your mom who's fallen numerous times, that's a crazy, ideally somebody gets her into a balance program, because one more fall, somebody hits their head, boom, they're by themselves and they don't make it. Cognitive behavioral mood issues, so empathy, depression, anxiety. It messes up your hormones. So like being ladies, absolutely, it can affect your female cycles. Sleep, oftentimes disturbed. And then we talked about that blood-brain barrier. I mean, and that's what all the research has shown so far. So any one of those 8 systems can go offline, or all of them, when you get a TBI.
Yeah, I think that's also just really interesting because it's more of an explanation on how we, like with with a stroke or a TBI or a concussion, how much it changes our whole body. One of my questions was going to be about some long-term effects of concussions if not treated. You just mentioned a lot of them, but what would be a good way to treat after a concussion?
So, you want the working documents, sadly, the working documents, there are not enough people who are following them. And what is the working document? You get the smartest people in the world to work on this. And I'm certified in traumatic brain injury. And I would tell my patients, I'm going to the conference and I'm the dumbest one in the room. And they're very polite and they say, oh, you're not dumb. I said, I didn't say I was dumb. I just said, I'm the dumbest one in the room. And what that means is I'm in the right room. And just the presenter was dual faculty at Harvard and Cambridge. The person beside me was TBI for Australia. The guy behind me was TBI for Europe. I mean, it's just like insanely smart people. So the data is there. It's not being used. They're run to their pediatrician, and their pediatrician's great, but they're not the right one. Or their neurologists are too busy dealing with MS. So you almost have to go to people that are specially trained in TBI to do that. So you asked a simple question. For instance, my mother, one of the main onuses for me to get in neurofeedback, she was 72 at the time of her stroke. I got her 1 year post-stroke. So with my siblings, we ran to this rehab and this rehab and this rehab and this rehab and that rehab. And after all that was done, they said, okay, now you can do with it. And as you know, in a stroke, you got a honeymoon. Your honeymoon is from 1 day to 3 months, maybe 6 months. And whatever you're at, you're kind of at. So I took a 72-year-old woman who couldn't feed herself, walk without a walker, dress herself, care for herself, shower, bathroom, commode. A year later, I got her to do all those things. And the brain is so pliable. It was just neuroplasticity. Think of it as you're trying to drive to your favorite place, but there's a bridge out. Well, you're not going to wait until that bridge opens up. You're going to take another route. But you have to poke the brain enough to say, hey, drive a little farther, but get around, because it's going to be 3 years before they open that bridge up. So the brain, it has phenomenal neuroplasticity as long as you can get it in the best metabolic state possible. I mean, hyperbaric chambers, amazing. You want to do those as quick as possible. You want to get them up to enough atmospheres where, you're pushing more oxygen into the brain to get over that speed bump of recovery. Is it never too late? I don't want to say it's never too late. The brain always impresses us. The brain always makes me silly when I say, "Oh, this can't happen." But the earlier the better. Anytime you have an injury or any event.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the big things we say around here is we're just going to be in lifelong recovery. We're not ever going to be done, which is okay. Fortunately, we're still alive to continue to work on our recovery and get better.
Right. But there's so many things an individual can do at home. You can go on Amazon and buy a Brock string for $10, right? You can go and get a foam pad, again, on Amazon for $20 and stand on it. And it's going to help your balance. It's going to help. There's so much an individual can do in their own venue, but there's just nobody's teaching it to you.
No, absolutely. And that brings me to another question. So, and not really just with the patients, but do you collaborate with other healthcare professionals for this particular person or whoever it may be to help create a more comprehensive treatment for your patient so that you're all together? Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm going to work. Many of them come in with some type of psychiatric meds. Is that anxiety, depression, whatever? So we work with them, and we work with functional med docs. I work with one of the best functional med doctors in Mid-Atlantic. And why? We have to get this blood-brain barrier. We have to get the autoimmune that oftentimes is present in an individual. These are the ones that they don't heal on their own. And we're in a very collaborative. I know what I know well, and I am 100%. Hey, that we need to get you to this physical therapist to work on balance exercises, or we need to work on this OT, or we need to get this functional med doc to get your hormones right while your body's in this recovery mode. Because if it doesn't, it'll just never recover. It'll hit a wall.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to know for sure, and also especially for our new brain injury survivors, which is really the main listeners that we have from, right? Because time is it's gold, and time is so important, and then also just receiving the help from the correct providers and who we're going to and who our family is going to for the help. I would love to thank you for coming to us. Thank you so much, Robert Baric. I just wanted to give you one more chance if you would like to say anything specifically to our listeners, any advice or anything that you think is just so important for you to tell our listeners.
Yeah. So again, it's a brain injury is not an individual event; it's a family event, and it's not the one person, because oftentimes that one person can really change, and it can make a huge factor through the whole family. And that's all through the literature. So I guess my thoughts are is try to aggressively get the brain in the best metabolic state as possible, as quickly as possible after any suspected one. I mean, that's why I'm bringing out that Concussion 911. Concussion 911 is basically a first aid kit for the brain. Boom, you have any type of a head bump, mild, moderate, severe. It's a powder you take for 8 to 10 days. What it's doing is it's protecting the brain. It's trying to minimize the negative metabolic residual effects. Number 2, if you've hit a wall, go to a different place, right? Don't, this doctor, hey, this is one person, right? They might be the best kidney person, but you need a vision person, right? And there is an amazing network of people that can do unbelievable things with traumatic brain injury and strokes. And the technology the technology is there, but it's just easier to everybody wants a pill. It's not a pill, right? It's the technology is there to heal so many things. In our office, we have people that are out of wheelchairs that have been there for 10 years. So you can do unbelievable recovery. The brain will always prove you wrong if you think you've hit a wall. It will always prove it wrong. You just have to give it the right nutrients, the right training, the right challenges, the right exercises, and it'll figure a way to route around. And maybe you'll never get 100%, but my mother, she's a great case. She was never going to live on her own again, but she can go to the bathroom by herself, shower herself, dress herself, feed herself, walk without a walker. What was her quality of life? What was her quality of the people's parents or the people in her lives? Huge. So don't settle for where you're at. But thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing good things about everything that's going on.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, and we will provide Dr. Baric's information in the description as well. And then I want to take this time again to remind our listeners that you can contact us or email us at bindwaves@thebind.org, as well as follow us on Instagram at bindwaves, or check out the website thebind.org/bindwaves.
Yep. And so much for you, Dr. Baric, and all of our listeners to know that all of the information for you will be in our description. And thank you so much for really sharing us your experience on concussion and helping our listeners about the importance of brain health. So thank you so much. And obviously to our listeners, don't forget to like us on all of your social media platforms and listen to us every Thursday.
Bye, folks.
Again, you can find us all on every Thursday. That's okay. So until next time.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Bind Waves and continue to support Bind and our nonprofit mission.
We support brain injury survivors as they reconnect into the life, the community, and their workplace.
And we couldn't do that without great listeners like you. We appreciate each and every one of you. Continue watching. Until next time.